a dying ranch, a silent boy who carries the weight of a brutal secret, and a man whose isolation is about to shatter when the son he never knew arrives with nowhere else to go. In the Montana frontier, survival means blood, silence, and forgiveness that doesn't come easy. This is a story about what happens when the past you buried shows up on your doorstep, hungry and broken, demanding you choose between the life you built alone and the family you never thought you deserved. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came hard off the ridge that morning, rattling the barn door like something trying to get in. Rowan Cade stood in the doorway of his kitchen, coffee going cold in his hand, staring out at land that looked meaner every year. The fences sagged, the cattle were thin, the grass didn't grow like it used to, and the men he still had working for him moved slower now, their faces harder, their jokes fewer. He didn't blame them. This wasn't a place that gave much back anymore. Rowan was 42 and looked older. His hair was dark but streaked with gray at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind and years spent not talking to anyone who mattered. He'd built this ranch with his own hands, carved it out of nothing, and now it was falling apart in the same silence he'd wrapped around himself like armor. He didn't mind the quiet. Quiet meant no questions, no expectations, no one close enough to see the parts of him that didn't work right. But lately, the quiet felt different, heavier, like it was waiting for something. Rowan drained the last of his coffee, bitter and lukewarm, and set the cup down on the counter. He pulled his coat off the hook by the door and stepped outside into the cold. The sky was low and gray, threatening snow that wouldn't fall for another week, but hung there anyway, making the air feel thick. Hank was already out by the east pasture, fixing a gate that had come loose in the night. He was older than Rowan by a decade, lean and wiry, with hands that never stopped moving. He'd been with Rowan since the beginning, back when the ranch was just an idea and a deed bought cheap from a man who didn't want to die out here. "Gate's shot," Hank called out as Rowan approached. "Needs replacing, not fixing." "Then replace it." "With what money?" Rowan didn't answer. There wasn't an answer worth giving. Hank wiped his hands on his pants and looked at Rowan with the kind of expression that said he'd been holding something back and was deciding whether or not to let it out. "Silas saw riders yesterday, North Ridge." "Hale's men?" "Probably." Rowan's jaw tightened. Victor Hale owned half the valley now, and he wasn't the kind of man who stopped at half. He was methodical, patient. He didn't burn barns or shoot livestock in the middle of the night like some two-bit outlaw. He just squeezed, cut fences, diverted water, made life hard enough that men gave up and sold cheap. Rowan wasn't going to sell, but he didn't know how much longer he could hold on either. "Keep an eye out," Rowan said, "and tell Silas to do the same." Hank nodded, but he didn't look convinced that watching would do much good. Rowan walked back toward the house, boots crunching on frozen ground. The ranch had 6 buildings total: main house, bunkhouse, barn, storehouse, chicken coop, and a shed that used to hold tools but now mostly held rust. Everything needed work. Everything needed money he didn't have. He was halfway to the porch when he heard it, the sound of a wagon. Rowan stopped, squinting toward the road. It was rare to see anyone out here who wasn't lost or looking for trouble. The wagon came slow, pulled by a tired horse that looked like it had been on the road too long. The driver was a woman, bundled in a coat too big for her, and sitting beside her was a boy, maybe 9 or 10, wearing a hat pulled low over his face. Rowan didn't move, just watched. The wagon rolled to a stop about 20 feet from the house. The woman climbed down first, stiff and deliberate, like her bones hurt. She was younger than Rowan expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair tied back and a face that had seen enough trouble to know how to carry it without flinching. "Help you?" Rowan called out. The woman looked at him, sizing him up in a way that said she'd done this before. "I'm looking for work. Cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. I don't eat much and I don't complain. Don't need help." "You sure about that?" Rowan's expression didn't change. "Yeah." The boy climbed down from the wagon then, moving carefully, and Rowan got his first real look at him. Thin, pale, quiet in a way that wasn't shyness. It was something else. Something that made Rowan's chest tighten for reasons he couldn't name. The woman glanced back at the boy, then at Rowan. "I'll work for room and board. You don't have to pay me. Just let us stay. Where are you coming from? Doesn't matter. It does if you're running from something. The woman's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Everyone out here is running from something, mister. You included. Rowan didn't like how easily she said that. Didn't like how true it felt. I've got 3 men in a ranch that's barely standing, he said. I don't need passengers. Then you need a cook, the woman shot back. Because I saw your kitchen through the window, and whatever you've been eating, it's not food. Rowan almost smiled. Almost. Hank came walking up then, wiping his hands on a rag, looking between Rowan and the woman like he was trying to figure out what he'd walked into. This is Mara, the woman said, like the decision had already been made. And that's Noah. The boy didn't say anything, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. Rowan studied them both for a long moment. He should have said no, should have sent them back down the road before they got comfortable. But something in the boy's face stopped him, something familiar, something that made his throat feel tight. 2 weeks, Rowan said finally. Then we see. Mara nodded. Fair enough. She turned and started unloading a small trunk from the back of the wagon. Noah helped her, moving quietly, efficiently, like he'd done this 100 times before. Hank gave Rowan a look that said, You sure about this? Rowan wasn't sure about anything, but he didn't stop them. The first night was strange. Mara cooked dinner, real dinner, not the half-burnt stew Rowan had been living on for months. She made stew with actual seasoning, biscuits that didn't taste like rocks, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The men ate in silence at first, not sure what to make of her, but by the end of the meal, even Hank was nodding his approval. Noah sat at the far end of the table, barely touching his food. He didn't talk, didn't look at anyone, just sat there, hands folded in his lap, eyes somewhere else. Rowan watched him without meaning to. After dinner, Mara started clearing plates. Rowan stood up to help, and she gave him a look that said she didn't need it, but didn't mind it either. He always this quiet? Rowan asked, nodding toward Noah. Yeah. Something wrong with him? Mara's hands paused for just a second. Nothing's wrong with him. He's just been through a lot. What kind of lot? She didn't answer right away, just kept washing plates, her movements careful and controlled. The kind you don't talk about unless you have to. Rowan let it drop, but he kept watching the boy. That night, Rowan lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the windows. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that bringing Mara and Noah into the house had opened a door he didn't know how to close. He didn't sleep much, and when he finally did, he dreamed of a woman he hadn't thought about in years. Her name was Evelyn, and she was the reason he lived alone. The next morning, Rowan found Noah sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around his knees, staring out at the pasture. The sun was just starting to come up, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Rowan stepped outside, coat pulled tight against the cold. You always up this early? Noah glanced at him, then back at the pasture. Yeah. His voice was soft, careful. Rowan sat down on the step beside him, not too close. You like it out here? Noah shrugged. It's quiet. That a good thing? Sometimes. Rowan didn't push, just sat there, the two of them watching the sun climb higher, turning the frost into something that almost looked beautiful. You ever been on a ranch before? Rowan asked. No? Want to learn? Noah looked at him then, really looked, and Rowan saw something flicker in the boy's eyes. Not excitement exactly, something more fragile. Yeah, Noah said quietly. I do. Rowan stood up, brushing frost off his pants. Come on, then. Noah followed him to the barn, where Hank was already saddling up one of the horses. Rowan grabbed a second saddle and brought it over to a roan mare named Clementine, old and patient and good with beginners. This is Clem, Rowan said. She won't give you trouble if you don't give her any. Noah reached out slowly, touching the horse's neck. Clem snorted softly, and Noah smiled, just a little, just enough. Rowan showed him how to saddle her, talking him through each step. Noah listened carefully, asking questions only when he didn't understand, and Rowan found himself explaining things he hadn't talked about in years. By the time they rode out to check the south fence, the sun was fully up, and the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. The days started to settle into a rhythm. Mara took over the kitchen and the house, and within a week, the place looked more like a home than it had in years. She didn't talk much, but she worked hard, and she didn't flinch when things got difficult. Noah started spending more time with Rowan, learning how to ride, how to mend fences, how to read the land. He was quiet, but he was smart, picked things up fast. And every now and then, Rowan caught him smiling. It felt good. It felt dangerous, because Rowan knew better than to get attached. 2 weeks in, Victor Hale's men showed up. There were 3 of them, riding slow and deliberate, stopping just outside the property line. Rowan was in the barn when Hank came running. "Riders," Hank said. "Hales." Rowan grabbed his rifle and walked out to meet them. The lead rider was a man named Carson, big and broad-shouldered, with a scar running down the side of his face. He smiled when he saw Rowan, but it wasn't friendly. "Rowan Cade," Carson said. "Been a while." "Not long enough." Carson's smile widened. "Mr. Hale wanted me to check in, see how you're doing. Tell him I'm fine." "That's so?" Carson looked around at the sagging fences, the thin cattle, the patched-up buildings. "Doesn't look fine to me." "Didn't ask your opinion." Carson's smile faded. "Mr. Hale's making offers, Cade. Good offers. You should take one before things get worse." "Not interested." "You sure about that?" Rowan didn't answer, just stood there, rifle held loose but ready. Carson looked at him for a long moment, then tipped his hat. "Suit yourself." He turned his horse and rode off, the other 2 men following. Rowan watched them go, his jaw tight, his heart pounding. Hank came up beside him. "That's not the last we'll see of them." "I know, Doc." That night, Rowan sat on the porch, nursing a whiskey and trying not to think about how bad things were about to get. Mara came out and sat down beside him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Trouble?" she asked. "Always." She didn't push, just sat there, quiet and steady. "You ever think about leaving?" Rowan asked after a while. "Every day." "But you don't." "No." "Why not?" Mara looked at him, her eyes sharp and clear. "Because some things are worth staying for." Rowan didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there, the 2 of them watching the stars come out, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. Case. The snow came a week later, heavy and sudden, covering the ranch in white and making everything harder. The cattle struggled. The men worked longer hours. And Noah got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever, then something worse. Mara did everything she could, hot water, blankets, herbs she'd brought with her, but the fever wouldn't break. Rowan sat by the boy's bedside, watching him shiver, and felt something crack open inside him. "He's going to be okay," Mara said quietly. "He's strong." Rowan didn't answer, because he was looking at Noah's face, really looking, and seeing something he should have seen from the beginning. The shape of the boy's jaw, the color of his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead. It was impossible, but it was true. Noah wasn't just some kid Mara had picked up along the way. He was Rowan's son, and the weight of that truth hit him like a gunshot. Rowan sat frozen beside the bed, staring at Noah's flushed face, and felt the ground drop out from under him. The fever had the boy shaking even under 3 blankets, his breathing shallow and uneven, but it wasn't the sickness that made Rowan's chest tighten until he couldn't breathe. It was the recognition, the curve of the boy's cheekbone, the line of his brow, the way his mouth pressed tight even in sleep, like he was holding something back. Rowan had seen that face before. Every time he looked in a mirror. He stood up too fast, the chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the room before Mara could say anything. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might crack a rib. He made it to the porch and stood there in the cold, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what he'd just realized. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But he knew it was. The door opened behind him. Mara stepped out, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, waiting. "How long have you known?" Rowan's voice came out rough, barely more than a growl. Mara didn't flinch. "Since the day I met him." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "Would you have believed me if I had?" Rowan turned to face her, anger rising fast and hot. You brought him here without saying a word, without giving me a choice. You had a choice, Mara shot back. You could have sent us away. You didn't. Because I didn't know. You knew. Her voice was sharp now, cutting through his protest. Maybe not in your head, but you knew. You saw him and you didn't turn him away. That's a choice, Rowan. He wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. From the first moment he'd seen Noah standing beside that wagon, something in him had recognized the boy. He just hadn't let himself believe it. Who was she? Rowan asked quietly. Mara's expression softened, just a little. Her name was Evelyn. The name hit him like a fist to the gut. He turned away, gripping the porch railing so hard his knuckles went white. Evelyn. He hadn't spoken her name in 10 years, hadn't let himself think about her, about what they'd had, about the way he'd walked away because he'd been too scared to stay. She's dead, Mara said, and her voice was gentler now. Died 2 years ago. Fever took her in the winter. She didn't have much, but she had Noah, and before she died, she told him about you. Told him where to find you if things ever got bad. Why didn't she come herself? Rowan's voice cracked. Why didn't she tell me? Because you made it pretty clear you didn't want to be found. That was true. When Rowan had left, he'd left clean. No forwarding address, no letters, no promises. He'd convinced himself it was the right thing to do, that Evelyn deserved better than a man who didn't know how to stay in one place, who didn't know how to be anything other than alone. He'd been wrong. He doesn't know, Mara said, that you're his father. Evelyn never told him your name, just that his father was a rancher in Montana. I figured it out when I saw you, saw the way you looked at him. Rowan closed his eyes. What am I supposed to do with this? That's up to you. He's sick, Mara. He might not... He couldn't finish the sentence. He's going to be fine, Mara said firmly. But when he wakes up, you're going to have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who runs or the kind who stays. She turned and went back inside, leaving Rowan alone on the porch with the weight of a truth he didn't know how to carry. He stayed out there until the cold made his bones ache, and even then, he didn't move. The fever broke 3 days later. Rowan had barely left Noah's side. He sat in that chair watching the boy breathe, listening to Mara move around the house, and trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to say when Noah finally woke up. He'd spent 10 years building walls, 10 years convincing himself that he was better off alone, and now all of it was crumbling. When Noah's eyes finally opened, they were clear but tired. He blinked slowly, looking around the room like he wasn't sure where he was. Then his gaze landed on Rowan, and he frowned. You've been here the whole time, Noah said. His voice was hoarse. Yeah. Why? Rowan didn't have an answer that made sense, so he just said, You scared us. Noah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I'm okay now. Good. Mara came in then, carrying a bowl of broth. She smiled when she saw Noah awake, and the relief on her face was so clear it made Rowan's chest hurt. About time, she said, setting the bowl on the bedside table. You've been out for 3 days. 3 days? Fever doesn't mess around out here, Mara said. She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind him. You need to eat, slowly. Noah took the bowl and sipped carefully. Rowan stood up, suddenly feeling like he was in the way. I'll check on the horses, he said. Mara gave him a look that said she knew exactly what he was doing, but she didn't stop him. Rowan walked out into the cold and didn't stop walking until he reached the barn. Hank was inside, mucking out stalls, and he looked up when Rowan came in. Boy okay? Hank asked. Yeah, fever broke. Hank nodded, leaning on his shovel. Good. Kid's got grit. Rowan didn't respond. He grabbed a brush and started working on one of the horses, needing something to do with his hands. You gonna tell him? Hank asked after a while. Rowan stopped brushing. Tell him what? Come on, Rowan. I got eyes. That boy looks just like you. Rowan set the brush down and turned to face him. Hank had been with him long enough to know when to push and when to let things lie, and right now he wasn't letting anything lie. I don't know, Rowan said finally. Well, you better figure it out, Hank said, because keeping secrets like that, they don't stay buried. Rowan knew he was right, but knowing something and doing something about it were two different things. By the end of the week, Noah was back on his feet. He was still pale, still moving slower than usual, but the spark was back in his eyes. He started helping around the house again, small tasks at first, then more as his strength returned. Rowan watched him carefully, looking for signs that the boy suspected anything. But Noah just went about his days, quiet and steady, like nothing had changed, except everything had changed. Rowan found himself paying attention to things he hadn't noticed before. The way Noah tilted his head when he was thinking. The way he smiled with just one corner of his mouth. The way he went still and silent when something upset him instead of lashing out. All of it reminded Rowan of Evelyn, and all of it made the guilt worse. One morning, Rowan was fixing a broken stall door when Noah came into the barn, bundled up in a coat that was too big for him. "Mara said you might need help," Noah said. Rowan looked up from the hinge he was working on. "You feeling up to it?" "Yeah." Rowan handed him a wrench. "Hold this steady while I tighten the bolt." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of wood and the clink of metal. It felt good, working side by side like this. Easy, like it was something they'd done 100 times before. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said after a while. "Sure." "Why do you live out here alone?" Rowan paused, the wrench going still in his hand. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've got land and a house and men who work for you, but it feels like you're alone anyway." Rowan set the wrench down and leaned back against the stall. "That's a hell of a question, kid. You don't have to answer." But Rowan found that he wanted to. Maybe because Noah had asked without expecting anything. Maybe because the boy deserved something honest after everything he'd been through. "I used to think being alone was safer," Rowan said slowly. "Easier. Can't lose people if you don't let them get close." "Did it work?" Rowan looked at him. "What do you think?" Noah thought about that for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I think it just made you sad." The simplicity of it hit Rowan harder than any accusation could have. Because the boy was right. He'd built this life thinking it would protect him, and all it had done was hollow him out. "Yeah," Rowan said quietly. "I think you're right." They finished the door in silence, and when it was done, Rowan stood back and tested it. It swung smooth and clean, no more drag or creak. "Good work," Rowan said. Noah smiled. "Thanks." Rowan watched him walk back to the house, and for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, something that felt almost like hope. That afternoon, Silas came riding in hard, his horse lathered and breathing heavy. Rowan was out by the south fence with Hank when they saw him coming. "That's not good," Hank muttered. Silas pulled up short, his face tight. "We got problems." "What kind?" "Hale's men cut the fence on the north pasture, ran off about 20 head of cattle." Rowan's jaw clenched. "When?" "This morning. Found it an hour ago." "They leave tracks?" "Yeah, headed straight toward Hale's land." Rowan looked at Hank, then back at Silas. "Get Luke. We're going after them." "Rowan," Hank said carefully. "You go on to Hale's land, he's going to call it trespassing. Maybe worse." "I don't care. Those are my cattle." "And if his men are waiting for you?" Rowan didn't answer. He just turned and started walking back toward the barn. Mara was on the porch when Rowan came back to the house to grab his rifle. She saw the look on his face and stepped in front of him. "What happened?" "Hale's men stole cattle. I'm going to get them back." "You're going to get yourself killed." "Maybe." "Rowan, I don't have a choice, Mara. If I let him take what's mine without fighting back, he'll take everything." Mara stared at him, her eyes hard. "And what about Noah? You going to leave him here wondering if you're coming back?" That stopped him. He looked past her, toward the house, where Noah was probably sitting by the fire, reading one of the old books Mara had brought. "I'll come back," Rowan said. "You better." Rowan rode out with Hank, Silas, and Luke an hour later. They followed the tracks north, across the ridge and into the valley where Hale's ranch sprawled across better land than Rowan would ever own. The cattle were easy to find, penned in a temporary corral just inside Hale's fence line, guarded by two men who didn't look surprised to see them coming. Rowan pulled his horse to a stop about 30 feet out. "Those are my cattle." One of the men, a wiry guy with a crooked nose, grinned. "Don't look like yours to me." "They came from my land." "Can you prove it?" Rowan's hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, but Hank put a hand on his arm. Easy, Hank murmured. The second guard, bigger and meaner looking, stepped forward. You got a problem. Take it up with Mr. Hale. Otherwise, get off his land. Rowan stared at them, his blood boiling. He could fight, could draw his rifle and start shooting and probably take both of them down before they knew what hit them. But that would mean war, and war meant bodies. And bodies meant Noah growing up without a father, all over again. Let's go, Hank said quietly. Rowan didn't move. Rowan, let's go. Finally, Rowan yanked his horse around and rode back the way they'd come. Hank, Silas, and Luke followed, and the sound of the guards laughing echoed behind them. When they got back to the ranch, Rowan dismounted and slammed his fist into the barn wall hard enough to split his knuckles. Hank didn't try to stop him, just stood there, waiting. This isn't over, Rowan said, breathing hard. I know. He's going to keep pushing until I break, or until you push back. Rowan looked at him. How? Hank shook his head. I don't know, but going in guns blazing, isn't it? Rowan knew he was right, but knowing it didn't make the anger go away. That night, Rowan sat on the porch again, staring out at the dark. Mara came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one without a word. They sat in silence for a while, the cold biting through their coats. You did the right thing, Mara said finally. Doesn't feel like it. It never does. Rowan took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter, the way he liked it. I don't know how to win this. You don't have to win. You just have to survive long enough for him to make a mistake. And if he doesn't, then you make him. Rowan looked at her. You always this smart? No, just used to fighting battles I can't win. He wanted to ask what she meant by that, but before he could, the door opened and Noah stepped out, wrapped in a blanket. Can't sleep? Mara asked. Noah shook his head. Too quiet. Come here, Rowan said, patting the step beside him. Noah sat down, pulling the blanket tighter. The 3 of them sat there together, watching the stars, and for a little while the weight on Rowan's chest felt lighter. Rowan? Noah said after a while. Yeah? Are we going to be okay? Rowan wanted to lie. Wanted to tell the boy that everything would be fine, that the bad men would go away, that the ranch would hold together. But he'd spent too many years lying to himself, and he wasn't going to start lying to Noah. I don't know, Rowan said, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are. Noah nodded, like that was enough. And maybe it was. The next few weeks settled into an uneasy rhythm. Hale didn't send his men back, but the damage was done. The stolen cattle were gone, and Rowan's herd was smaller, weaker. He worked harder, pushed the men harder, trying to make up for the loss, but it felt like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a cup. Noah helped where he could. He was getting stronger, more confident. He learned how to rope a calf, how to mend a saddle, how to read the weather by the color of the sky. And every day, Rowan saw more of Evelyn in him. The way he laughed, the way he listened, the way he never gave up, even when things got hard. It made Rowan ache. One evening, Mara was cleaning up after dinner when she turned to Rowan and said, You need to tell him. Rowan looked up from the ledger he'd been staring at for the past hour. Tell him what? Don't play dumb. You know what? Rowan set the pencil down. He's a kid, Mara. He doesn't need that kind of weight. He's already carrying it. He just doesn't know why. What's that supposed to mean? Mara sat down across from him. He thinks you're keeping him around out of pity. That one day you're going to wake up and decide he's too much trouble. That's not true. Then tell him the truth. Tell him why you look at him the way you do. Tell him why you sat by his bed for 3 days when he was sick. Tell him he's not just some stray you picked up. Rowan's throat tightened. What if it makes things worse? What if it makes things better? He didn't have an answer for that. The decision was made for him 3 days later when Noah found the letters. Rowan had kept them in a box under his bed, tied with string, never opened. Letters from Evelyn that had followed him from town to town before he'd finally stopped long enough to put down roots. He'd never read them, never had the courage. But Noah, looking for an extra blanket, had found the box and opened it. Rowan came back from checking the fence line to find the boy sitting on the floor of his room, letters spread out around him, tears streaming down his face. Noah! The boy looked up at him, and the pain in his eyes was like a knife. These are from my mother, Noah said, his voice shaking. She wrote to you. She told you about me. Rowan's heart stopped. You knew, Noah whispered. You knew the whole time, and you didn't come. Noah, I didn't. I never read them. I swear. Then why do you have them? Rowan didn't have an answer, not one that would make this better. He knelt down beside the boy, his hands shaking. I was scared, Rowan said, and his voice broke. I was young and stupid and scared, and I thought leaving was the right thing to do. I thought your mother deserved better than me. She loved you. Noah's voice was barely a whisper. She told me. She said you were a good man, even if you didn't believe it. Rowan closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Noah didn't say anything, just sat there, surrounded by letters his mother had written to a man who'd never answered. Are you my father? Noah asked finally. Rowan opened his eyes and looked at the boy, at his son. Yeah, he said. I am. Noah stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked out of the room. Rowan didn't follow, just sat there on the floor, surrounded by ghosts, and let the weight of it all crush him. Rowan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch in the freezing dark, the letters still scattered across his bedroom floor, and tried to figure out how to fix something that might be broken beyond repair. The silence from Noah's room felt heavier than any words could have been. Mar had come out once, looked at him, and went back inside without saying anything. Even she didn't have advice for this. When the sun finally came up, Rowan was still sitting there, numb and exhausted. He heard the door open behind him, but he didn't turn around. He didn't sleep either, Mara said quietly. I heard him crying. Rowan's chest tightened. I don't know what to say to him. Start with the truth. The rest will follow or it won't. She went back inside and Rowan forced himself to stand up. His legs were stiff from the cold, his back aching, but none of that mattered. He walked into the house and stood outside Noah's door for a long time before he knocked. No answer. Noah, Rowan said. Can I come in? Still nothing. Rowan opened the door anyway. Noah was sitting on the bed, knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the wall. His eyes were red and swollen, and he didn't look at Rowan when he came in. Rowan stood there, feeling useless, feeling like every word he could say would be the wrong one. But he had to try. I know you're angry, Rowan started. I'm not angry, Noah said, his voice flat. I'm just trying to figure out if anything you've said to me was real. That hit harder than anger would have. Rowan sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to keep some distance between them. Everything I've said to you was real, Rowan said. I just didn't know how to tell you the rest. You had weeks. I know. And you didn't say anything. I know. Noah finally looked at him, and the hurt in his eyes was worse than any accusation. Why didn't you come find us? If you're really my father, why didn't you come? Rowan took a breath. Because I didn't know you existed. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. And those letters, I never opened them. I was too much of a coward. So you just left her? Yeah, I did. Noah looked away again. Did you love her? Rowan's throat went tight. Yes. Then why'd you leave? Because I didn't think I was good enough for her. I was 22, broke, and I didn't know how to be anything other than alone. I thought she'd be better off without me. And now? Now I know I was wrong. About all of it. Noah didn't respond. He just sat there, arms wrapped around his knees, looking smaller than he should have. I can't change what I did, Rowan said quietly. I can't go back and be there for your mother, or be there when you were born, or any of the things I should have done. But I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I want to try. Try what? To be your father. To do better. Noah's jaw tightened. What if I don't want that? The words hit like a punch, but Rowan nodded. Then I'll respect that. But I'm not sending you away. You've got a place here as long as you want it, no matter what you decide. Noah looked at him, searching his face for something, truth maybe, or some sign that Rowan meant what he said. Rowan didn't look away. Just sat there and let the boy see him, all of him, broken parts and all. I need time, Noah said finally. You've got it. Rowan stood up and walked to the door. He paused, looking back at Noah one more time. For what it's worth, Rowan said, your mother was right. You deserve better than me. You still do. He left before Noah could respond. The next few days were brutal. Noah avoided him, staying close to Mara, and only speaking to Rowan when he had to. The distance felt like a canyon. and Rowan didn't know how to cross it. He threw himself into work, fixing things that didn't need fixing, riding out to check fences that were fine, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from circling the same guilt over and over. Hank noticed. "You're going to work yourself to death." "Good," Rowan muttered. "That's not going to fix things with the boy." "Nothing's going to fix things with the boy." Hank shook his head. "You're wrong. Time will, if you give him enough of it." Rowan didn't answer. He just kept working. On the fourth day, Victor Hale made his next move. Rowan was in the barn when he heard the crackling sound, faint at first, then louder. He stepped outside and saw smoke rising from the east pasture. His stomach dropped. "Fire!" he shouted. Hank and Silas came running. Luke was already grabbing buckets from the well. The four of them sprinted toward the pasture, and when they got close enough to see, Rowan's worst fear was confirmed. The grass was burning, the flames spreading fast in the dry winter wind, and standing just beyond the fire line, watching, were three of Hale's men. Rowan didn't stop to think. He ran straight at them, rage boiling over. "Rowan, don't!" Hank yelled, but Rowan was already too far gone. He grabbed the nearest man by the collar and slammed him into the ground. The man hit hard, gasping for air, and Rowan's fist came down once, twice, before someone yanked him back. It was Silas, strong enough to drag Rowan off before he could do real damage. The other two men had their guns drawn, but they didn't shoot. They just stood there smiling. "Back off, Cade," one of them said, "unless you want this to get worse." "You started this fire," Rowan snarled. "Prove it." Rowan lunged again, but Silas held him back. Hank stepped between them, hands raised. "We've got a fire to put out," Hank said. Let them go." "Like hell." "Rowan, the fire." Rowan looked past the men and saw the flames climbing higher, spreading toward the fence line. If it reached the barn, they'd lose everything. He turned and ran back toward the pasture, leaving Hale's men behind. They didn't follow, just stood there and watched. It took 2 hours to get the fire under control. By the time they'd beaten it back, Rowan's hands were blistered, his lungs burning from smoke, and half the east pasture was scorched black. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to hurt, enough to send a message. Hank sat down on the ground, breathing hard. "He's escalating." "I know. Next time it might not be grass, might be the barn, might be the house." Rowan wiped soot from his face. "So what do we do?" "We fight back, but smart, not with fists." "I'm listening." Hank looked at him. "We need proof. Something that ties Hale to what he's been doing. Cutting fences, stealing cattle, starting fires. Right now, it's our word against his, and his word carries more weight." "Where do we get proof?" "His ranch, his records. Something that shows he's been doing this to other people, not just us." Rowan stared at him. "You're talking about breaking into his place." "I'm talking about getting what we need to survive." Silas spoke up then. "I know a guy who used to work for Hale, got fired last year. He might talk." "Where is he?" "Town, works at the livery." Rowan nodded. "Let's go." They rode into town the next morning, leaving Luke to watch the ranch. Mara had packed them food, and Noah had stood on the porch watching them leave. He didn't say anything, but his eyes followed Rowan until they were out of sight. The town was small, barely more than a main street, with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a livery stable. Silas led them to the livery, where a man in his 50s was shoeing a horse. He looked up when they approached, and his expression went wary. "Silas," the man said, "didn't expect to see you." "Hey, Dutch, need to talk." Dutch set down his tools and wiped his hands on his apron. He looked at Rowan and Hank, sizing them up. "This about Hale?" "Yeah." Dutch's jaw tightened. "I don't want trouble." "We're not asking you to make trouble," Rowan said. "We just need information. Information gets people killed out here." "So does staying silent." Dutch looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "What do you want to know?" "How does Hale operate?" Rowan asked. "How does he take land without anyone stopping him?" Dutch glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "He's got the bank in his pocket. The territorial bank. He takes out loans in other people's names, forges documents. Then when they can't pay, the bank seizes the land and sells it to him for pennies. It's all legal on paper, but it's fraud underneath." Rowan's blood went cold. How many people has he done this to? At least a dozen that I know of, probably more. And no one stopped him? Who's going to stop him? The sheriff's on his payroll. The judge, too. Hale owns this valley, Cade. You're just the latest guy who doesn't know it yet. Hank spoke up. Where does he keep his records? His ranch, main house. He's got an office on the second floor. Keeps everything locked up tight. You ever been inside? Once. When I was still working for him. He doesn't let many people up there. Rowan looked at Hank. We need to get inside that office. Dutch stepped back. I didn't hear that. And I don't want to know how you plan to do it. Fair enough, Silas said. Thanks, Dutch. They left the livery and stood in the street, the wind kicking up dust around them. You really want to do this? Hank asked. Rowan nodded. We don't have a choice. We could run, take what we've got and go somewhere else. And let Hale win? Better than getting killed. Rowan looked at him. You got a family waiting somewhere, Hank? Someone you need to get back to? Hank shook his head. No, just you and the ranch. Then we're doing this. They spent the next 2 days planning. Rowan sent Silas back to town to watch Hale's movements, to figure out when the man was home and when he wasn't. Hank worked on mapping out the ranch based on what Dutch had told them and what they already knew from their last visit. And Rowan tried to keep his mind from spinning out of control, because the truth was, they were about to do something that could get them all killed. On the second night, Mara cornered him in the barn. You're going after Hale, she said. It wasn't a question. Rowan didn't deny it. Yeah. And if you get caught? Then I get caught. Mara's eyes flashed. That's not good enough. You've got a son now, Rowan. You don't get to throw your life away just because you're angry. I'm not throwing it away. I'm fighting for it. It doesn't feel like fighting. It feels like suicide. Rowan turned to face her. What do you want me to do, Mara? Sit here and wait for him to burn the house down? Wait for him to come after you and Noah? I want you to be smart, to think about what happens if you don't come back. I will come back. You don't know that. She was right. He didn't. But he couldn't just sit here and do nothing either. I have to try, Rowan said quietly. If I don't, he wins. And I can't let that happen. Mara stared at him, her jaw tight, and for a moment he thought she was going to argue. But then she just shook her head and walked away. That night, Noah knocked on Rowan's door. Rowan opened it, surprised. The boy had barely spoken to him in days. Can I come in? Noah asked. Yeah. Noah stepped inside and stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. I heard you're going after Hale, Noah said. Where'd you hear that? I listen. Rowan almost smiled. Yeah, I am. Why? Because if I don't, he's going to take everything. The ranch, the land, all of it. Noah nodded slowly. And you think you can stop him? I think I have to try. Noah looked at him, and for the first time in days there was something other than hurt in his eyes, something that looked almost like understanding. My mother used to say you were stubborn, Noah said, that once you decided to do something, nothing could stop you. Rowan's throat went tight. She said that? Yeah. She also said it got you in trouble a lot. She was right about that too. Noah was quiet for a moment, then he said, I don't want you to die. The words hit Rowan hard. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I'm not planning on it, Rowan said. But you might. Yeah, I might. Noah looked down at the floor. I'm still mad at you. I know. But I don't want you to die before I figure out if I can stop being mad. Rowan felt something break open in his chest. He reached out and put a hand on Noah's shoulder, half expecting the boy to pull away. But Noah didn't. He just stood there, tense but not retreating. I'll come back, Rowan said. I promise. Noah looked up at him, and there were tears in his eyes. You better. They stood there for a moment, neither of them knowing what else to say. Then Noah turned and walked out, and Rowan was alone again. But this time, the alone felt different. The night they chose was cold and moonless, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and made everything feel like it was holding its breath. Rowan, Hank, and Silas rode out just after midnight, leaving Luke behind to watch the ranch. Mara had tried one last time to talk Rowan out of it, but he'd kissed her forehead and told her he'd see her in the morning. He hoped that was true. They approached Hale's ranch from the north, staying off the main road, moving through the trees until they could see the outline of the house against the sky. There were lights in a few of the windows, but most of the place was dark. Hale's men would be in the bunkhouse, sleeping or playing cards, and with any luck, Hale himself would be in bed. They tied the horses to a tree a quarter-mile out and went the rest of the way on foot. Silas had brought tools to pick the lock on the back door, and Hank carried a rifle, just in case. The house was massive, bigger than anything Rowan had ever lived in, all stone and dark wood and windows that reflected nothing. They moved around to the back, where a door led into the kitchen. Silas knelt down and worked the lock while Rowan and Hank kept watch. It took 3 minutes. Then the lock clicked, and the door swung open. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The house was silent, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and tobacco. Rowan's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might give them away. Hank pointed toward the stairs, and they moved carefully, stepping lightly, avoiding the spots that looked like they might creak. When they reached the second floor, Silas led them down the hall to a door at the end. This lock took longer, but eventually it gave. The office was exactly what Dutch had described. A large desk, shelves lined with ledgers and files, and a safe in the corner. Rowan went straight for the desk and started going through the drawers. Hank took the shelves, pulling down ledgers and flipping through them. "Here," Hank whispered, holding up a ledger. "Loan documents. Half these names are people who don't own land anymore." Rowan looked over his shoulder. The documents were meticulous, dated, signed. But the signatures didn't match. Some were shaky, some too perfect. Forgeries. "Take it," Rowan said. They grabbed everything they could carry: ledgers, contracts, letters, evidence of fraud, bribery, and theft. Enough to bury Hale if it reached the right people. Then they heard footsteps. Rowan froze. Hank and Silas did the same. The footsteps were coming down the hall, slow and steady. Hank moved to the door, rifle ready. Rowan stuffed the last of the documents into his coat and looked around for another way out. There was a window, but it was a long drop to the ground. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle turned. Hank raised the rifle just as the door swung open, and Victor Hale stood there, holding a lamp in one hand and a pistol in the other. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hale smiled. "Well, this is unfortunate." Victor Hale stood in the doorway, lamplight flickering across his face, and for a man who'd just caught 3 intruders in his office, he looked remarkably calm. He was older than Rowan, maybe 50, with silver hair combed back and a face that had probably been handsome once before cruelty hardened it into something sharp and unforgiving. He wore a silk robe over his nightclothes, and the pistol in his hand was steady, aimed directly at Rowan's chest. "Put the rifle down," Hale said to Hank, his voice quiet and conversational, like they were discussing the weather. Hank didn't move. His finger was on the trigger, the barrel pointed at Hale's head. "I said put it down," Hale repeated, "or I shoot your friend here, and then my men downstairs shoot all 3 of you before you make it to the stairs." Rowan's blood went cold. He hadn't heard anyone downstairs, but Hale's expression said he wasn't bluffing. Hank hesitated, then slowly lowered the rifle and set it on the floor. "Good," Hale said. He stepped into the room, keeping the pistol trained on Rowan. "Now, kick it over here." Hank kicked the rifle across the floor. Hale picked it up with his free hand and leaned it against the wall behind him, still holding the pistol like he'd been born with it. "You're Rowan Cade," Hale said, looking at Rowan with something that might have been curiosity. "I've heard about you. Stubborn, proud, stupid enough to think you could hold on to that worthless piece of land." "It's not worthless," Rowan said. "It is to me. But I don't need it to be valuable. I just need you off it." "Why? You've already got half the valley." Hale smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Rowan's skin crawl. "Because I want the other half. And men like you, Cade, you're in the way. You don't know when to quit. You don't know when you've lost. So I have to make you quit. I have to make you lose." "By stealing cattle? Burning pastures?" "By doing whatever it takes." Hale's expression didn't change. "You broke into my house, Cade, stole my property. That's a hanging offense. Those documents prove you've been committing fraud," Rowan shot back. "Forging loans, stealing land. You've done this to a dozen people. Prove it." Hale's smile widened. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? The bank? The judge? They're all on my side. You're just a rancher with a grudge and a pile of papers you stole in the middle of the night." Rowan felt the rage building in his chest, hot and suffocating. Because Hale was right. Even with the documents, even with the proof, it might not be enough. So what now? Rowan asked. You shoot us? Oh, I'm not going to shoot you, Hale said. That would be too quick, too clean. No, I think I'll let the law handle this. My men are already on their way to town to fetch the sheriff. He'll arrest you for breaking and entering, theft, trespassing. You'll hang, Cade, and your ranch will be mine by the end of the month. Rowan's mind raced, looking for a way out. The window was still an option, but it was a long drop, and Hale would shoot at least one of them before they made it. The door was blocked, and even if they overpowered Hale, his men would be waiting downstairs. Then Silas moved. He was fast, faster than Rowan expected. He lunged at Hale, knocking the pistol to the side just as it fired. The shot went wide, slamming into the wall, and then Silas and Hale were on the ground wrestling for the gun. Go! Hank shouted, grabbing Rowan's arm and shoving him toward the window. Rowan didn't argue. He grabbed the documents he'd stuffed in his coat and ran to the window, throwing it open. The cold air hit him like a slap. It was at least a 15-foot drop to the ground, but there was no time to think about it. Behind him, he heard another gunshot. A scream. He didn't know whose. Jump! Hank yelled. Rowan jumped. He hit the ground hard, his legs buckling, pain shooting up his ankle. But he rolled and forced himself to his feet. A second later, Hank came crashing down beside him, landing better, already pulling Rowan up. Silas! Rowan shouted, looking back at the window. He's not coming, Hank said, his voice grim. We can't just leave him. We don't have a choice. Voices were shouting inside the house now, footsteps pounding. Rowan heard Hale yelling orders, heard the sound of men scrambling. Hank dragged Rowan toward the trees, and they ran. Rowan's ankle screamed with every step, but he didn't stop. They crashed through the brush, branches tearing at their clothes, and didn't slow down until they reached the horses. Rowan's hands were shaking as he untied his horse and hauled himself into the saddle. Hank was already mounted, his face pale in the darkness. Silas, Rowan started. Is either dead or captured, Hank said flatly. And we will be too if we don't move. They rode hard, pushing the horses as fast as they dared in the dark. Behind them, Rowan could hear shouting, could see the flicker of torches as Hale's men started the search. But the darkness was on their side, and by the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, they were miles away. They didn't stop until they reached the ranch. Mara was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. When she saw them, relief and fear crossed her expression in equal measure. Where's Silas? She asked. Rowan dismounted, wincing as his injured ankle hit the ground. Hale's got him. What? We got the documents, Rowan said, pulling the ledgers from his coat and handing them to her. But Hale caught us. Silas bought us time to get out. Mara took the ledgers, her hands trembling. Is he alive? I don't know. Luke came running from the barn, his face pale. What happened? Get the horses inside, Hank said, and lock the barn. Hale's men might come looking. Luke didn't argue. He grabbed the reins and led the horses away. Mara looked at Rowan, her eyes hard. You promised you'd come back. I did come back. Barely. She turned and walked into the house, and Rowan followed her, limping. Inside, Noah was sitting at the table, his face pale. He looked at Rowan, and the relief in his eyes was almost enough to break him. You're hurt, Noah said. It's just my ankle. I'll be fine. Mara set the ledgers on the table and started flipping through them. Her expression grew darker with every page. This is it, she said quietly. This proves everything. Fraud, forgery, bribery. If this gets to the territorial governor, Hale's finished. How do we get it to the governor? Rowan asked. We send it to the territorial bank, Hank said. They've got oversight over the local branches. If they see this, they'll have to investigate. And how do we get it to them without Hale intercepting it? We take it ourselves. Rowan stared at him. That's a 3-day ride. Then we better leave soon. Mara shook her head. You're not going anywhere, not with that ankle. You can barely walk. I'll manage. No, Mara said firmly. Hank goes. You stay here and protect this place. Protect Noah. Rowan wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He couldn't ride 3 days in his condition. And if Hale's men came here looking for revenge, someone needed to be here to stop them. Fine, Rowan said. Hank, you take the documents. Get them to the bank. Don't stop for anything. Hank nodded. What about Silas? We get him back when this is over. If he's still alive, Rowan thought, but didn't say. Hank left an hour later, the ledgers wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into his saddlebag. He didn't say goodbye, just gave Rowan a long look that said everything he needed to say, and rode out. The ranch felt emptier without him, quieter. Rowan spent the rest of the day fortifying the house. He nailed boards over the windows, checked the ammunition, made sure every gun they had was loaded and ready. Luke helped, his movements quick and nervous, and Noah watched from the doorway, his face pale but determined. "Are they going to come here?" Noah asked. "Maybe," Rowan said. "Probably." "What do we do if they do?" "We fight." Noah nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Can I help?" Rowan looked at him, at this boy who was his son, and felt his chest tighten. "You stay inside with Mara. You don't come out unless I say so." "But, Noah, please." Noah's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Mara came out then, carrying a rifle. "I know how to shoot." "I know you do," Rowan said. "Then don't tell me to stay inside." Rowan almost smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. They waited. The day stretched on, the sun climbing high and then sinking low, and still no one came. Rowan sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the road. His ankle throbbed, but he ignored it. Luke was in the barn, keeping watch from the loft. Mara was inside with Noah, but she kept coming to the window, checking. Night fell, and still nothing. Maybe they weren't coming. Maybe Hale was too smart to make a move this soon, knowing it would look suspicious if something happened to Rowan right after the break-in. Or maybe they were just waiting for the right moment. Rowan didn't sleep. He sat on that porch all night, watching the dark, listening for the sound of hoofbeats. When the sun finally came up, he was exhausted, his body aching, but he didn't move. The attack came at noon. Rowan saw the dust first, rising from the road like a storm. Then he saw the riders. 6 of them, maybe 7, moving fast. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his ankle, and shouted, "Luke! They're here!" Luke came running from the barn, rifle in hand. Mara appeared in the doorway, her face set. "Get Noah to the cellar," Rowan said. "I'm not hiding," Noah said, stepping out onto the porch. "You're not fighting either. Now go." Noah looked like he wanted to argue, but Mara grabbed his arm and pulled him back inside. Rowan heard the cellar door slam, and then it was just him and Luke and Mara. The riders pulled up about 50 feet from the house. Rowan recognized a few of them from the fire, from the cattle theft. Carson was at the front, the big man with the scar, and he was smiling. "Rowan Cade," Carson called out. "You've caused Mr. Hale a lot of trouble." "Tell Hale to come say that himself," Rowan shouted back. "Mr. Hale doesn't waste his time on dead men." "Then what are you waiting for?" Carson's smile faded. "Burn it." 2 of the men dismounted and pulled torches from their saddlebags. They lit them with practiced ease, the flames catching fast, and started walking toward the barn. Rowan raised his rifle and fired. The shot hit one of the men in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the torch and fell, screaming. The second man froze. "Next one's through the head," Rowan said. Carson pulled his own rifle and fired back. The shot went wide, slamming into the porch railing. Luke returned fire, and one of the riders went down, his horse rearing. Then it was chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air, bullets slamming into the house, into the ground, into the barn. Rowan ducked behind the railing and reloaded, his hands steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. Mara was firing from the window, her shots careful and controlled. Luke was on the other side of the porch, reloading and firing, reloading and firing. One of the riders broke away and rode hard toward the barn. Rowan shot him out of the saddle. Another tried to circle around the house, and Mara's shot took him down. But there were too many of them, and Rowan's ammunition was running low. Carson dismounted and ran toward the house, using his horse as cover. Rowan tried to get a clear shot, but Carson was fast. He made it to the side of the house and kicked in the door. Rowan's blood went cold. The cellar. Noah was in the cellar. He dropped the rifle and ran inside, his ankle screaming, but he didn't care. Carson was halfway across the room, heading for the cellar door, and Rowan tackled him from behind. They hit the floor hard, rolling, punching. Carson was bigger, stronger, but Rowan was desperate. He got his hands around Carson's throat and squeezed. Carson's face turned red, then purple, and his fists came up, slamming into Rowan's ribs. Rowan didn't let go. Carson's eyes started to roll back. And then the cellar door flew open, and Noah came running out with a knife in his hand. "No!" Rowan shouted, but Noah didn't stop. He drove the knife into Carson's side, and Carson screamed, his grip on Rowan loosening. Rowan shoved him off and staggered to his feet, pulling Noah back. Carson was on the floor, clutching his side, blood pouring between his fingers. "Get back in the cellar," Rowan gasped. "But now!" Noah ran back down the stairs, and Rowan slammed the door shut. He turned back to Carson, who was trying to stand, and kicked him in the chest. Carson went down hard and didn't get back up. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Rowan limped to the door and looked out. Luke was still standing, his rifle smoking. Mara was reloading, and the remaining riders were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. They'd won. Barely. Rowan sat down on the porch steps, breathing hard, pain radiating from his ankle, his ribs, his everything. Mara came out and sat beside him, her hands shaking. "Is Noah okay?" she asked. "Yeah, he's okay. Are you?" Rowan didn't answer. He didn't know if he was okay, didn't know if any of them were. Luke walked over, his face pale. "We got 3 of them. The rest ran." "They'll be back," Rowan said. "I know." Rowan looked at the barn, at the scorched grass, at the bodies lying in the dirt. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 3 days were the longest of Rowan's life. He didn't know if Hank had made it to the territorial bank, didn't know if Silas was alive or dead, didn't know when Hale would send more men. All he could do was wait. Noah stopped avoiding him. The boy stuck close, helping where he could, not saying much but always there. And Rowan found himself talking to him, telling him stories about the ranch, about building it from nothing, about the mistakes he'd made along the way. "Why'd you come back?" Noah asked one night as they sat by the fire. "What do you mean?" "You left my mother. You could have kept running, but you came back here, built this place. Why?" Rowan stared into the flames. "Because I thought if I built something, if I made something with my own hands, it would fill the hole I'd made by leaving. But it didn't. It just made the hole bigger. And now? Now I'm trying to fill it a different way." Noah looked at him. "With me? With you? With Mara? With this place? With all of it?" Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad you're trying." Rowan's throat went tight. "Me too." On the 4th day, Hank came back. Rowan saw him riding up the road and felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked him over. Hank looked exhausted, his face gaunt, but he was alive. "Did you make it?" Rowan asked as Hank dismounted. "Yeah, I made it." "And?" "They're sending inspectors. Should be here within the week." Rowan let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "What about Silas?" Hank's expression darkened. "I asked around in town. Hale's holding him. Hasn't killed him yet, but he's hurt." "How bad?" "Bad enough." Rowan's jaw tightened. "We're getting him back." "How? Hale's got him locked up tight. We can't just walk in there again." "We don't walk in. We wait for the inspectors. When Hale's empire starts falling apart, he won't have the manpower to hold Silas." Hank didn't look convinced, but he nodded. That night, Rowan sat with Mara on the porch, staring out at the dark. "You think this is really over?" Mara asked. "No," Rowan said. "Not yet, but it's close. And if the inspectors don't find enough? If Hale finds a way out? Then we find another way to stop him." Mara looked at him. "You've changed." "How?" "You're not running anymore." Rowan thought about that. She was right. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from something. He was standing and fighting for it. "I've got something worth staying for now," he said quietly. Mara smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. The inspectors arrived 6 days later, 2 men in suits riding up to the ranch in a wagon. They introduced themselves as federal auditors sent by the territorial bank, and they asked to see the documents Hank had delivered. Rowan showed them everything: the ledgers, the forged signatures, the records of fraudulent loans. The inspectors took notes, asked questions, and when they were done, they thanked Rowan and rode straight to Hale's ranch. Word came back 2 days later. Hale had been arrested, his assets seized, his men scattered. The fraud had been so extensive, so blatant, that the territorial governor had personally ordered his prosecution, and Silas had been found, alive but barely, locked in a storage shed on Hale's property. It was over. Rowan rode into town with Hank and Luke to bring Silas home. They found him at the doctor's office, bandaged and bruised but conscious. When Silas saw Rowan, he tried to sit up, but the doctor pushed him back down.
"Easy," the doctor said. "You're not going anywhere for a few days." "I'm fine," Silas rasped. "You're not fine," Rowan said, sitting down beside him. "But you will be." Silas looked at him, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. "Did we win?" "Yeah, we won." Silas closed his eyes. "Good."
They brought him back to the ranch a week later once the doctor cleared him to travel. Mara fussed over him, making sure he had a bed in the bunkhouse and enough food to feed a small army. Noah helped, bringing water and blankets, and Silas watched the boy with a thoughtful expression. "That your kid?" Silas asked Rowan one afternoon. "Yeah. Looks like you." "I know," Silas nodded. "Good for you, Rowan. About time you had something worth fighting for." Rowan didn't argue. The ranch slowly came back to life. With Hale gone, the pressure lifted. Other ranchers in the valley started reaching out, offering help, sharing resources. The cattle started gaining weight. The fences got mended. And for the first time in years, Rowan felt like the place might actually survive. Noah started calling him by his name instead of just Silence. And one day, without warning, he called him something else. "Dad?" Rowan looked up from the fence he was fixing. Noah was standing a few feet away, holding a hammer, looking nervous. "Yeah? Can you show me how to do this part?" Rowan's chest tightened, but he nodded. "Yeah, come here." He showed Noah how to drive the nail in straight, how to test the board to make sure it held. And when they were done, Noah smiled and Rowan realized that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally done something right. That night, as the sun set over the ridge and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Rowan stood on the porch with Mara beside him and Noah sitting on the steps, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wouldn't last forever. There would be more fights, more struggles, more winters that tested them. But for now, they had this: a home, a family, a future. And that was enough. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. Rowan was in the barn, checking on one of the horses that had thrown a shoe, when Luke came running in, his face pale and tight. "Riders coming," Luke said. "A lot of them." Rowan's stomach dropped. He grabbed his rifle and walked outside, squinting against the afternoon sun. Sure enough, there was dust rising from the road, and as it got closer, he could make out the shapes. 10 men, maybe 12, riding hard and fast. Hank came out of the bunkhouse, his own rifle in hand. "That's not the inspectors." "No," Rowan said. "It's not." Mara appeared on the porch, Noah right behind her. Rowan turned to them. "Get inside, lock the doors." "Rowan, now, Mara." She didn't argue. She pulled Noah inside and Rowan heard the bolt slide into place. He turned back to the riders, his heart pounding, his mind racing through possibilities. If this was Hale's men coming for revenge, he didn't have enough ammunition to hold them off. If they wanted blood, they were going to get it, but Rowan and his people would go down swinging. The riders got closer, and Rowan's finger moved to the trigger. Then he saw the man at the front, and his breath caught. It wasn't Hale's men. It was the territorial marshal, flanked by federal deputies, and riding beside him was Victor Hale, hands bound, face bruised and swollen. Rowan lowered his rifle, confusion replacing the fear. The marshal pulled his horse to a stop about 20 feet from the porch and dismounted. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with a badge pinned to his chest and eyes that had seen too much. "Rowan Cade?" the marshal asked. "That's me, Marshal Garrett. I'm here on behalf of the territorial governor." He gestured to Hale, who was still mounted, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Mr. Hale here has been charged with fraud, theft, arson, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence you provided was enough to secure an arrest warrant, and we've been conducting a full investigation into his operations." Rowan stared at Hale, at the man who'd tried to destroy him, now sitting there in chains. It didn't feel real.
"What do you need from me?" Rowan asked. "Your testimony," the marshal said. "There's going to be a trial. We need you to testify about the cattle theft, the fire, the attack on your property." "I'll testify." The marshal nodded. "Good. We'll be in touch." He turned to remount his horse, but Hale spoke up then, his voice rough and bitter. You think this is over, Cade? Hale said. You think you've won? Rowan looked at him. Yeah, I do. You're a fool. Even if they convict me, you're still broke. Your ranch is still falling apart. You'll lose it anyway, just slower. Rowan walked closer until he was standing right in front of Hale's horse. Maybe, but at least I'll lose it on my own terms, not yours. Hale's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, the marshal yanked his horse around and started riding away. The deputies followed, and Hale went with them, still shouting threats that got swallowed by the distance. When they were gone, Rowan stood there for a long time, just breathing. Hank came up beside him. Well, Hank said, that was unexpected. Yeah. You really going to testify? Yeah, I am. Hank nodded. Then we better make sure this place is still standing when you get back. The trial was set for 3 weeks later in the territorial capital, a 2-day ride from the ranch. Rowan didn't want to go. The idea of leaving the ranch, leaving Noah and Mara, made his skin crawl. But the marshal had been clear. Without Rowan's testimony, Hale might walk. So he went. Mara packed him food for the journey, more than he needed, and pressed a small bundle into his hands before he left. What's this? Rowan asked. Open it later. He tucked it into his saddlebag and turned to Noah, who was standing on the porch, arms crossed, trying to look brave. You gonna be okay? Rowan asked. Yeah. You sure? Noah nodded, but his eyes were tight. Are you coming back? Yes. You promise? Rowan put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I promise. And when I get back, we're going to finish that fence we've been working on. Noah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Okay. Rowan mounted his horse and rode out, Hank riding beside him. They didn't talk much on the way, just rode in silence, watching the land change from open prairie to rolling hills to the outskirts of the capital. The city was bigger than Rowan expected, full of noise and people and buildings that stretched 3 stories high. It made him uncomfortable, all that crowding, all that noise, but he kept his head down and followed the marshal's directions to the courthouse. The trial started the next morning. Rowan sat in the witness box, his hands folded in his lap, and told the truth. He told them about the stolen cattle, about the fire, about the attack on his ranch. He told them about the documents he'd found in Hale's office, about the forged signatures and the fraudulent loans. And when Hale's lawyer tried to tear his testimony apart, tried to paint him as a bitter man with a grudge, Rowan didn't flinch. You broke into Mr. Hale's home, the lawyer said. Stole his property. Isn't that correct? Yes. And you expect this court to believe that you were acting in good faith? I expect this court to look at the evidence, Rowan said. The documents speak for themselves. The lawyer pressed, but Rowan didn't budge. He'd spent 10 years running from the truth, and he wasn't about to start lying now. When the trial finally ended, 3 days later, the jury deliberated for less than an hour. They came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Hale was sentenced to 20 years in prison, his assets seized and liquidated to pay restitution to the people he'd defrauded. Rowan watched as they led Hale away, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. On the ride back to the ranch, Rowan remembered the bundle Mara had given him. He pulled it out of his saddlebag and unwrapped it. Inside was a letter written in Mara's careful handwriting. It said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't forget that." Rowan folded the letter and tucked it into his coat pocket, close to his heart. When he got back to the ranch, Noah was the first one to run out and meet him. The boy didn't say anything, just threw his arms around Rowan's waist and held on tight. Rowan stood there, stunned, and then slowly put his arms around Noah and held him back. I told you I'd come back, Rowan said quietly. I know, Noah said, his voice muffled. But I'm still glad you did. Mara was on the porch smiling, and when Rowan looked at her, she nodded, like she was saying, See? I told you. The weeks that followed were hard, but good. The restitution money from Hale's estate took time to process, but when it finally came through, it was enough to cover the ranch's debts and then some. Rowan used it to buy new cattle, fix the fences properly, and hire 2 more hands to help with the work. The ranch started to feel like a real operation again, not just a man and his ghosts holding on by their fingernails. Noah threw himself into learning everything he could. He worked beside Rowan from dawn to dusk, asking questions, listening carefully, and never complaining. The kid had grit, more than Rowan had given him credit for,
and watching him grow into the work made something in Rowan's chest ache in a good way. One evening, they were sitting on the porch after a long day, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple, and Noah looked at Rowan with that serious expression he got when he was thinking hard about something. "Can I ask you something?" Noah said. "Sure." "Do you think my mother would be proud of me?" Rowan's throat tightened. He thought about Evelyn, about the woman he'd loved and left, about the life she'd built without him, and the boy she'd raised alone.
"Yeah," Rowan said. "I think she'd be real proud." "What about you?" "Me? Are you proud of me?" Rowan looked at him, at this boy who'd been through so much and still had the courage to ask that question, and he felt something break open inside him, not in a bad way, in the way that makes room for something new. "Yeah, Noah," Rowan said, his voice rough. "I'm proud of you." Noah smiled, and it was the kind of smile that lit up his whole face.
Winter came early that year, hard and fast, covering the ranch in snow and forcing everyone to huddle close. But Rowan had prepared for it this time. The barn was stocked with hay, the cattle had shelter, and the house was warm. Mara kept the fire going and cooked meals that filled the house with smells that made it feel like home. Silas recovered slowly, but he recovered. He was quieter than he'd been before, more thoughtful, and he carried a limp from where Hale's men had broken his leg. But he didn't complain. He just got back to work, doing what he could, and when Rowan tried to tell him he didn't have to push so hard, Silas just shook his head. "I've got nowhere else to be," Silas said. "Might as well be useful." Rowan understood that. He'd felt the same way for most of his life. But now, looking around at the people who'd stayed, who'd fought alongside him, he realized that being useful wasn't the same as belonging, and for the first time, he felt like he belonged. One night, a storm rolled in with wind that rattled the windows and snow that piled up against the doors. Rowan was in the barn, checking on the horses, when Mara came out, wrapped in a heavy coat and carrying a lantern. "You should come inside," she said. "It's getting bad out here." "Just making sure everything's secure." "It is. Come on." Rowan followed her back to the house, and when they got inside, Noah was sitting by the fire, reading one of the old books Mara had brought. He looked up when they came in and smiled. "Storm's really going," Noah said. "Yeah," Rowan said, shaking the snow off his coat. "But we're ready for it." Mara made coffee, and the three of them sat by the fire, listening to the wind howl outside. It was warm and quiet, and Rowan realized that this was what he'd been searching for all those years ago when he'd left Evelyn. Not just land or a house or something he could build with his hands. He'd been searching for this, for people who stayed, for a place that felt like home. "Rowan?" Mara said, breaking the silence. "Yeah?" "What are you thinking about?" He almost didn't answer, but then he looked at her, at Noah, and he realized they deserved the truth. "I'm thinking about how I spent most of my life running from things," Rowan said, "and how it took me way too long to figure out that the things worth having are the things you stay for." Mara smiled. "Took you long enough." "Yeah, it did." Noah looked at him. "Are you staying now?" "Yeah, kid, I'm staying." Spring came, and with it, new life. The snow melted, the grass started to grow, and the cattle that had survived the winter grew fat and healthy. Rowan hired more hands, good men who needed work and weren't afraid of it, and the ranch started to feel like it was thriving instead of just surviving. Noah turned 10 that spring, and Mara insisted on making a cake. It was lopsided and a little burnt on the edges, but Noah ate 3 slices and declared it the best cake he'd ever had. Rowan gave him a new hat, the kind real ranchers wore, and Noah wore it every day after that, even when it was too hot. One morning, Rowan was out checking the north fence when he saw a rider coming up the road. He tensed, old instincts kicking in, but as the rider got closer, he relaxed. It was just a man on a tired horse, probably looking for work or directions. The man pulled up and tipped his hat. "Morning. This the Cade Ranch?" "It is," Rowan said. "I heard you might be hiring." Rowan looked him over. The man was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that had seen some hard living but hadn't been broken by it yet. "What's your name?" Rowan asked. "Tom? Tom Ellis?" "You got experience with cattle, Tom?" "Some. Worked a few ranches down south before things got bad." Rowan nodded. "We could use another hand. Pays fair, and the work's hard. You good with that?" Tom smiled, relief washing over his face. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Don't thank me yet, Rowan said.
You haven't met the others. He took Tom back to the ranch and introduced him to Hank, Silas, and Luke. They sized him up, asked him a few questions, and then Hank nodded. He'll do, Hank said. Tom fit in quickly, and within a few weeks it felt like he'd been there all along. The ranch had a rhythm now, a sense of purpose, and Rowan found himself looking forward to each day instead of dreading it. One evening, after the work was done and everyone had eaten, Rowan and Noah went for a walk out to the ridge that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, and the land stretched out below them like something out of a painting. It's beautiful, Noah said. Yeah, Rowan agreed. It is. They stood there in silence for a while, just watching the light change. Then Noah spoke up, his voice quiet. Do you ever think about my mother? Rowan's chest tightened. Every day. Do you think she'd be mad at you for leaving? Rowan thought about that. He thought about Evelyn, about the way she used to laugh, about the way she'd looked at him like he was something worth keeping. And he thought about the letters he'd never opened, the years he'd wasted running from the best thing that had ever happened to him. Yeah, Rowan said, I think she'd be mad, but I also think she'd forgive me. Eventually. How do you know? Because she loved me enough to tell you about me, even after I left. That takes a kind of forgiveness I don't think I deserve, but she gave it anyway. Noah nodded slowly. I think I forgive you too. Rowan looked at him, surprised. Yeah? Yeah. You're not perfect, but you're trying. That's enough. Rowan's throat went tight, and he put a hand on Noah's shoulder. Thanks, kid. They walked back to the house together, and when they got there, Mara was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Rowan and kept one for herself. You two have a good walk? She asked. Yeah, Rowan said. We did. She smiled, and the 3 of them sat there on the porch, watching the stars come out, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Not in the way that meant nothing could go wrong, but in the way that meant even when things did go wrong, they'd face it together. Summer brought its own challenges. A drought settled over the valley, drying up the smaller creeks and making water scarce. Rowan had to ride out every day to check the main river, making sure the cattle had enough to drink, and the men worked longer hours to keep everything running. But they made it through. They always did. One afternoon, Rowan was in the barn repairing a saddle when Mara came in and sat down beside him. I need to talk to you about something, she said. Rowan set the saddle aside. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She paused, like she was choosing her words carefully. I've been thinking about staying, permanently. Not just as the cook, but as part of this place, part of this family. Rowan looked at her, surprised. You want to stay? If you'll have me. Mara, you've been part of this place since the day you got here. You don't have to ask. She smiled, but there was something vulnerable in her eyes. I know, but I wanted to hear you say it. Rowan reached out and took her hand. Your family, Mara. You and Noah both. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. Her eyes went bright, and she squeezed his hand. Thank you. They sat there for a while, not saying anything, just being. And Rowan realized that this was what he'd been missing all along. Not just a place to live, but people to live with. People who saw him, flaws and all, and chose to stay anyway. Fall came, and with it, the harvest. The ranch had its best year in a decade, and Rowan was able to pay off the last of his debts and start putting money aside for the future. He talked to Hank about expanding the herd, about buying more land, about building something that would last. You've changed, Hank said one evening as they sat by the fire. How so? You're not just surviving anymore, you're building. Rowan thought about that. Yeah, I guess I am. It's good to see, Rowan nodded. It's good to feel. That winter was easier than the one before. The barn was full, the house was warm, and everyone had enough to eat. Noah was growing fast, shooting up like a weed, and Rowan found himself having to buy new clothes for the kid every few months. One evening, as they were sitting around the dinner table, Noah looked at Rowan and said, Can I ask you something? Sure. When I grow up, can I run this ranch? Rowan set down his fork, surprised. You want to run it? Yeah, if that's okay. Rowan looked at him, at this boy who'd come into his life by accident and changed everything, and he felt a swell of pride so strong it almost knocked him over. "Yeah, kid," Rowan said. "It's more than okay. It's yours. Whenever you're ready." Noah grinned, and Mara reached over and squeezed Rowan's hand under the table. The years passed, and the ranch grew. Rowan kept building, kept working, and kept learning how to be a father. It wasn't easy. There were days when he failed, days when he said the wrong thing or pushed too hard or didn't push hard enough, but Noah was patient with him, and Mara was there to remind him that perfection wasn't the goal. Just being there was. By the time Noah was 15, he was running cattle like he'd been born to it. He was tall and strong, with Rowan's eyes and Evelyn's smile, and watching him work made Rowan's chest ache with something that felt like regret and pride mixed together. One evening, Rowan and Noah were sitting on the ridge again, watching the sunset, and Noah turned to him. "Do you ever regret it?" Noah asked. "Regret what?" "Leaving my mother, not being there when I was born." Rowan didn't answer right away. He thought about all the years he'd lost, all the moments he'd missed, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a stone. "Yeah," Rowan said finally. "I regret it every day, but I can't change it. All I can do is try to make up for it now." "Do you think you have?" Rowan looked at him. "I don't know. You tell me." Noah thought about that for a long time. Then he said, "Yeah, I think you have." Rowan's throat went tight, and he nodded. "Thanks, kid." They sat there until the stars came out, and when they finally walked back to the house, Mara was waiting on the porch with coffee and a smile. The ranch became something more than just land and cattle. It became a place where people came when they needed a second chance. Rowan hired men who'd made mistakes, who'd lost everything, who needed a place to start over. And he gave them what someone had never given him, a chance to prove they were more than their worst moments. Hank eventually retired, his body worn out from years of hard work, and Rowan made sure he had a cabin on the property and a steady income for the rest of his life. Silas stayed on as long as he could, but his injuries eventually caught up with him, and he passed quietly one winter night surrounded by people who loved him. Rowan buried him on the ridge, overlooking the valley, and Noah carved a marker that said, "He stayed when it mattered." Mara never left. She became the heart of the ranch, the person everyone turned to when things got hard, and Rowan couldn't imagine the place without her. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rowan turned to her. "I never thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For staying, for bringing Noah here, for not giving up on me." Mara looked at him, her eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Rowan. I didn't stay for you. I stayed for me, because this is where I wanted to be." Rowan nodded, and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Years later, when Noah was 22 and running the ranch like he'd been born to it, Rowan found himself thinking about Evelyn again. He thought about the letters he'd finally read, the ones where she'd told him about the pregnancy, about Noah, about how much she'd loved him despite everything. And he thought about the life they could have had if he'd been brave enough to stay. But he also thought about the life he'd built here, the family he'd found, and the man he'd become. And he realized that maybe it wasn't about the life he could have had. Maybe it was about the life he'd chosen to build once he stopped running. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, Rowan stood on the ridge with Noah beside him. The boy, no, the man, was taller than Rowan now, broader in the shoulders, with a confidence that came from knowing who he was and what he was capable of. "You did good, Dad," Noah said quietly. Rowan looked at him, surprised. Noah had started calling him Dad a few years back, and it still caught him off guard every time. "Yeah?" Rowan said. "Yeah. You built something real here, something that'll last." Rowan thought about that. He thought about the ranch, about the people who'd come and gone, about the ones who'd stayed. And he thought about the boy standing beside him, the son he'd never expected, the family he'd never thought he deserved. "We built it," Rowan said. "Not just me, all of us." Noah smiled. "Yeah, we did." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, and Rowan felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly. Not the kind that meant everything was perfect and nothing could go wrong, but the kind that came from knowing you'd done your best, that you'd stayed when it would have been easier to run, that you'd built something worth keeping. The ranch would go on long after Rowan was gone. Noah would run it, And maybe one day Noah's kids would run it too. It would face droughts and storms and hard winters. It would struggle and survive and maybe even thrive. But it would endure. Because that's what things built on choice and loyalty and hard-won love always did. Rowan had spent most of his life believing he was better off alone, believing that getting close to people only led to pain, that the safest way to live was to keep everyone at arm's length and never let them see the parts of him that were broken. But standing there on that ridge, with his son beside him and a home waiting below, he realized he'd been wrong about everything. The truth was, being alone was easy. It was safe. It required nothing from you except the ability to keep moving, keep surviving, keep your head down, and your walls up. But staying was hard. Staying meant letting people see you. It meant failing and trying again. It meant waking up every morning and choosing to be there, even when it hurt, even when you didn't know if you were doing it right. And that was the thing no one ever told you about family. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never making mistakes or always knowing the right thing to say. It was about showing up. It was about staying when it would be easier to leave. It was about building something together, brick by brick, day by day, until you looked around one day and realized you'd created something that mattered. Rowan had lost years with Evelyn. He'd lost the chance to see Noah grow up, to be there for his first steps and first words, and all the moments that only came once, and he would carry that regret for the rest of his life. But he'd also learned something from it. He'd learned that you couldn't change the past. You couldn't go back and fix your mistakes or undo the damage you'd done. All you could do was wake up the next morning and try to do better. And that was enough. It had to be. Because at the end of the day, life wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It was about choosing the people you loved over and over again, even when it was hard, even when you failed them, even when you didn't know if you were enough. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe being enough wasn't about never making mistakes. Maybe it was about making mistakes and staying anyway, about failing and getting back up, about breaking and letting people help you put the pieces back together. Rowan looked out at the valley, at the land he'd fought for, at the home he'd built, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude, not for the things that had gone right, but for the things that had gone wrong and taught him what mattered. For Evelyn, who'd loved him even when he didn't deserve it and given him a son he'd never known he needed. For Mara, who'd stayed when she could have left and showed him what family really meant. For Noah, who'd forgiven him when he didn't have to and given him a second chance he'd never thought he'd get. For Hank and Silas and Luke and all the men who'd fought beside him and believed in something bigger than themselves. For this land, this brutal, beautiful, unforgiving land that had broken him down and built him back up into someone better. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of grass and earth and the promise of rain. Noah shifted beside him, and Rowan put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on," Rowan said. "Let's go home." They walked down the ridge together, father and son, and when they reached the house, Mara was waiting on the porch with dinner ready and a fire burning in the hearth. And for the first time in his life, Rowan Cade understood what it meant to belong. Not to a place, not to a piece of land or a name or a legacy, but to the people who chose to stay. And that, he realized, was everything.